In the wake of E.T. in 1982, the 80s saw a wave of boy and his blank films. Some of the E.T. ripoffs also used aliens such as Mac and Me, but a frequent idea involved cute robots instead of aliens, Short Circuit being the main example. In 1985, Diana Hestell's novel Friend was published. It contained elements of the aforementioned films as well as influence from Frankenstein. Warner Brothers hired Wes Craven to adapt the book. However, he was unavailable to write the script because he was busy directing episodes of the 1985 Twilight Zone revival. Bruce Joel Rubin was brought in to write the script. Deadly Friend was released on October 10, 1986. The story is about Paul, a teenage super genius whose best friend is a robot he built himself named BB. Paul, his mom, and BB move to a new town so that Paul can attend college. He quickly makes friends with Tom and his next-door neighbor, Samantha. It is quickly apparent that Sam is being abused by her father. During a prank gone wrong, BB is destroyed. Soon after, Sam's father kills her. Unable to deal with her death, Paul uses BB's AI microchip to restore Sam. The resurrected Sam goes on a killing spree, including her father and the old lady neighbor that destroyed BB. After she is discovered, a cop accidentally shoots and kills her again. Paul then goes to the morgue to resurrect her again, but BB bursts out of Sam's skin and kills Paul. The tone of the book was apparently a macabre love story. Sam and Paul actually died together, Romeo and Juliet style. Paul, thinking Sam was trying to kill him, knocks her off a bridge into an icy lake. Realizing she wasn't going to kill him, Paul jumps in after her so that they can die together. Craven and Rubin wanted to stick to that tone. This is another one of those instances where Craven was trying to break out of horror and prove he could do other genres. This film was even initially shot with the intention of a PG rating. WB test screened the film and it got a pretty negative reaction. Supposedly, the test screening was filled with Craven fans who were disappointed that it wasn't a straight horror film. Realizing Craven's popularity in the horror genre, WB decided to pivot the film into that market. The film was heavily reshot and re-edited. Craven and Rubin were asked to add an opening jump scare scene, gory nightmare sequences, bloodier death scenes, and a shock ending. Now, I think it's important to note that studio meddling has quite often led to disappointing movies. But a very specific film in the last few years has created a weird bit of discourse around this occurrence. Mostly it's used as an excuse when people can't deal with not liking a movie. For example, when people were disappointed with Rise of Skywalker, a rumor went around that there was a much better director's cut that Disney purposely sabotaged because they were mad that J.J. Abrams had signed a deal with Warner Brothers. And it's this thing where anything that people thought would make the movie better was part of this Abrams cut. Reylos were convinced that Ben Solo originally lived. Prequel fans were convinced that a bunch of cameos from that trilogy were shown as Force Ghost and not just the voice cameos that are in the film. Among many other things, none of which are true as far as we know. It's just a really easy narrative that the studio is evil and the artist is a helpless victim whose precious vision was tarnished. And frankly, the studios sometimes make the right calls. A great example is Halloween 6, which, like Justice League, went through heavy reshoots and re-editing. The resulting theatrical cut was really bad. And there was always this talk of a mythical producer's cut that everyone involved built up as a great film that the evil Miramax destroyed. Miramax is evil, but for different reasons. The theatrical cut was finally released on Blu-ray a few years back, and it's not very good. In fact, I would say it's pretty terrible. And the theatrical cut made some much needed changes that were improvements. I get why studios sometimes make the decisions that they do. Maybe Justice League doesn't need to be 4 hours long. Maybe Suicide Squad shouldn't be a soulful drama. The point is that yes, Warner Brothers meddling is a major factor in what makes Deadly Friend not work. But that doesn't mean that Craven's initial cut would have been a great film. We don't know. I'd love to see it so I could judge for myself, but I understand that they felt they needed to appeal to Craven's audience. I will say that the shock ending is terrible. I thought the one in Deadly Blessing was bad, but for fuck's sake, this is the worst. It was apparently the head of Warner Brothers' idea, and everyone was just too scared to tell him how much it sucked. It's so goofy. It's frustrating that these weird endings keep getting forced on Craven's films because they're all so bad. Tone is ultimately a problem with the film. As a fan of Craven and horror, you come in with expectations, and the film's opening promises that with an overly violent robot. But the reshoots are wildly apparent. It does feel like watching two movies stitched together. And even without the reshoots, it feels strange. There's this really goofy looking robot made by a teenage genius living next door to a girl being physically abused by her father. The comedic and dark elements are not blended together well. The big hook of the movie is the dead teenage girl robot. That doesn't happen until an hour in. Part of that, I think, is due to adapting a book. Deadly Friend doesn't have a solid flow or momentum the way that movies should. It's paced like a novel. The problem is that it doesn't feel like you get to the interesting part of the story until the third act. And part of that is interesting. Kristy Swanson played Sam in her very first feature film role, and she's great. She's charismatic and sympathetic, both when she's human and a killer robot. You feel for her over anyone else. There's a great scene in which Robot Sam sees a picture of her and Paul with BB. Now, BB's brain is still mostly in charge at this point. The psychotic break comes from BB being blown up and placed in an entirely different body. A human one that he recognizes. It's very confusing and traumatic. And then, as we see at the end, Sam's mind is fighting for control. That's all great, but it doesn't have any room to breathe. It feels truncated, and anytime it feels like a scene is about to really go somewhere, the movie abruptly cuts. I did enjoy that this is ultimately Craven's take on the Frankenstein story, and it is interesting to see Frankenstein from the point of view of a high school romance. From what I understand, that was more overt in the book, with lightning being involved in resurrecting Sam. And while the gore is out of place, it is fun, especially this scene. Overall, the movie is full of solid ideas, but it doesn't come together. The pacing is off, the tone is weird, but not in a way that's compelling, and the reshoots only make that problem much worse. It's not a terrible movie by any means, but it is disappointing and a shame that Craven had such a hard time breaking out of horror.